We need to find a way to get in good trouble, necessary trouble, if we're going to save America.
This is Paige. Welcome to the Necessary Trouble Show. Here's your host, my dad, Russell Fugett.
Thanks, Paige. Welcome back to the Necessary Trouble Show. Today we're going to do a quick election recap, and I want to just quickly point out that when we record this episode, we do not have a result yet in the presidential election. So even though this episode is airing today on a Monday, there's still so much to discuss. And we're here live at the Good Word Digital Studios as we record today. I'm very excited to have Delilah Agho-Otoghile, who is the founder of VoteSimple, a voter registration organization in the state of Texas. Delilah, thanks for being a guest today.
Thanks for having me, Russell.
So tell us a little bit about what happened in Texas. Of course, folks who were pulling for a blue wave were disappointed on election night, but I know so much progress appears to have been made in local elections and throughout the state. Tell us a little bit about the work that you do and also what you see and take away from the results on election night.
Yeah, for sure. So I've been working in Texas, throughout the South, and some other states for the last several years. I think this year in Texas was really interesting. With VoteSimple, we launched earlier this summer, really just trying to meet the moment and provided a space for people to register, knowing that in the middle of the pandemic, in a state where on the ground, in-person registration is really what closes the gap. Wasn't going to happen at the scale that it's happened at before. Texas is one of 5 states that doesn't have online voter registration. So we kind of just aim to circumvent the lack of online voter registration. So with VoteSimple, looking at the data in Texas, we have 4 million folks who are unregistered to vote. 2.5 million of those people are people of color, and majority of those people, right, are youth voters or young people. So we really wanted to meet young people, to meet people of color where they are. Invested heavily in running some paid digital ads, invested heavily in using trusted messengers on TikTok and some other social media platforms to push a link to folks, our website, votesimple.org, where people could fill out an online version of the voter registration form that we would print and then mail back to them. So all they'd have to do is sign it. In Texas, it needs a wet signature to be processed. And we included a postage paid envelope so they could mail that back. Because if you think about folks registering to vote on their own in Texas, they have to go to the Secretary of State's website or a county site, print out that form, find an envelope and a stamp and mail it back. And I don't have stamps or envelopes in my house, so I do not know how many other folks would be able to register that way. So myself and 2 of my friends thought of VoteSimple really as a passion project to just kind of close the gap with voter reg here. And since June have registered just under 10,000 folks, mostly concentrated in Houston and surrounding Houston areas, but definitely a model that works and that we'll expand on in the future. I think since 2018, right, we have had unprecedented voter registration in Texas. And then of course this year, right, had unprecedented turnout across the state, which was amazing considering we were in the middle of a pandemic. But I think to your point, despite the turnout, there weren't many gains down ballot in Texas. We were primed to flip the state house. We flipped 1 state house seat here in Texas with Ann Johnson defeating Sarah Davis here in Houston. And there were a number of seats, right, that were in a 1 to 2 point margin that Biden won that we didn't win with our state house candidates. We protected our congressional seats that we were able to flip in 2018, but also did not pick up any congressional seats, unfortunately. But with all of that, there were some wins at the countywide level. In Harris County, we swept Harris County again, electing the first Black county attorney, also the youngest county attorney. He's 32, Christian Menifee. Neighboring county in Fort Bend County, one of the most diverse counties in America. We also swept Fort Bend County. They also have the first Black county attorney. and the tax assessor and the first Black county sheriff in Fort Bend County. And we have the youngest and first Muslim constable in the country in Fort Bend. So it's really interesting that we were able to hold on to some seats or flip some seats on the countywide level, but that didn't translate into some state house wins going into redistricting.
Great analysis and great summary. Congratulations for the 10,000 plus voters that you and your organization have registered. Tell me, that process you just described to be able to register to vote sounds so antiquated. And of course, every state has different systems and processes in place for voter registration. Some places that make it easier than others. There's voter registration here where I am in Maryland, where you can register to vote when you renew or get your driver's license, for instance. Would you say the system in Texas is just antiquated, or is it really a form of, or is it really designed for voter suppression, or is it some combination or mix that you would describe?
Yeah, I think it's probably a little bit of all of the above. Right before the deadline here, so our deadline is 30 days before the election. I think it was October 5th. We did win a court case, a lawsuit, where folks who were trying to register when they renewed their driver's license were unable to, and that changed. But that changed, right, 6 weeks before the deadline to register, as opposed to being in place, years before this election. Yeah, I think, I don't know. I think that Texas is one of the states, Texas has been named the hardest state to vote in. I would think that it's also one of the states that's really hard to register to vote in, which is why there are a lot of organizations here trying to change that.
Looking forward, what do you foresee some of those changes being? Of course, we're 1,400 days till the 2024 election. I know people are going to be, a lot of folks are going to be sick of talking about politics and elections and voter registration, when things die down here heading into 2021 and beyond. What does your work look like going into next year and looking out for the next cycle?
Yeah, I think this year, right, I think a lot of Democrats, progressives made the decision as soon as the pandemic hit to not run traditional field programs, to not be knocking doors, to not increase the spread of COVID. I think that not running traditional field really hurt us in some places, especially in a year where, on the other side, for the first time in some places, Republicans were running an aggressive field program. I think moving forward, we're not going to get rid of COVID-19 anytime soon, but we need to find a way where we are not overly reliant on paid comms or anything else that isn't really reaching the voters we need to reach, right? Maybe there are ways where we can knock doors safely, or we can hold in-person events safely, or we can, replicate that. That's not necessarily over a Zoom because it's not the same. So I think we really need to rethink our organizing and field programs in the middle of a pandemic and not mixing them all together. And honestly, I think that we need to invest early as we're waiting right now, right, for results in Georgia and in Nevada. And honestly, I think, Texas could have been on the map, but Texas and Georgia didn't get investment, right? That like the Wisconsin or Florida or Arizona or North Carolina got. I think that had Georgia had an ounce of what Florida had months ago, maybe Georgia would have already been called for Joe Biden. I think that early investment and in a longer game will help us in some of these southern states and the states that are primed to flip. And honestly, I think moving forward, Russell, we need to rethink in the middle of this pandemic how we message anything regarding the economy. I think that a lot of people are perplexed with some folks who are still voting for Trump with everything that's happened. But if you think about it, right, we are pushing this message that we have to keep people safe. We have to shut things down to control the spread. All of that makes sense. But there are still people sitting at home who are questioning how they're going to feed their family or how they're going to pay their bills. And maybe we did not, we didn't put out a message that necessarily resonated with all of those voters because we are so focused on ensuring people are safe. And it doesn't have to be a trade-off. I just don't think that I don't think we owned the economic message this cycle.
So building on that, Delilah, how do you foresee, maybe the next 4 years, but even maybe longer out in this decade, how do we as a nation change, or there's some changes you see coming in terms of how we actually are able to register and cast our votes?
Yeah, I think we just need to make all of this a little bit more accessible. I think that we should not normalize folks having to wait in line, should not normalize some of the restrictions around registering to vote, or again, voting in general. And I think some of that could just be controlled at running better candidates. I would say, more progressive, younger candidates who will do what it takes to change some of these laws, like we saw here in Harris County. But I think that as we have more folks voting, we will see increased options around voting and voter registration in general. And I think we're moving to that as we saw a lot of people adapt to changing voting methods, or like voter registration methods, because of the pandemic. So I think we are moving in the right direction. I think some states need to catch up, Texas included, but I think we're getting there.
Well said. I would tend to agree with you on that point.
So when I'm not with VoteSimple, Russell, I think I mentioned to you this before, but I work with a PAC called Win Justice, and Wisconsin was one of our states. But like Wisconsin, don't know if you knew, every county clerk is mostly a volunteer. So the people administering the elections are volunteers, and they all have their own county-wide like regulations and rules that they abide by, which was like mind-blowing to me, because when we're trying to run a program in Wisconsin, like there are different places, different counties like shut off the polls are open until 8, but there are some counties where you couldn't drop off ballots at drop boxes after 7. Or like some counties where ballots are rejected, but they weren't actively curing ballots. And some counties where they were. Like it's like insane, which happens anywhere. But like the municipalities just have so much agency that makes it hard to try and win an election statewide.
Right. Like I heard, for instance, folks in Michigan were volunteers. Someone saying folks in Michigan were volunteers to count the votes. I'm like, they're not. I don't know if that was accurate, but I'm like, I hope it's not. Like, wouldn't they be paid hourly employees to count these votes? And I know if there's a recount, then the party that requests, or the campaign that requests the recount, has to pay for it. And I know President Trump is currently raising money to pay for recounts in Wisconsin, because he's going to have to pay for it. It's under 1%, I believe, or something. I forget the threshold. But so I was afraid to hear that volunteers are counting votes, and not, God bless them if that's the case. But I feel like folks should be getting an hourly wage, especially given the pressure and the hours. And of course, now we have people outside making threats and wanting to come in. I mean, all this craziness. I'm hoping that that news I heard on the radio was not accurate. But nonetheless, a national voting, some standards for federal elections, and funding to support people to not be volunteers, at least in and around and leading up, maybe the weeks or the months leading up to the general election at a minimum, I would think would be a wise course of action to better secure our elections and have consistency, at least statewide, but hopefully the baseline nationwide.
I don't know if you saw, Russell, in Harris County. So with our county clerk who was appointed in June, 34-year-old Black guy, really set out to change how folks voted in Harris County this year. So we had drive-through voting that was challenged 100 times by Republicans, where there were 2 sites across the county where, I mean, literally like going through a drive-through Sonic, you would just park your car and could vote in your car and wouldn't ever have to leave your car. And over 10% of people who voted across all of Harris County voted through drive-through. But this was the first time we'd ever implemented it. And, to this day, Republicans are still suing and appealing about whether or not those votes should have been counted or drive-through voting should have been allowed. The same clerk also implemented 24-hour voting on one day in Harris County, where over 10,000 people voted through a 24-hour polling location. But again, another thing, if we talk about like voting accessibility, how many people can vote between 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Or, if we expand the hours, would we be expanding, the electorate and who could actually vote. And Harris County, of course, too, tried to send vote by mail applications to every voter, and that was struck down. But a thing, that a lot of states implemented because of the pandemic. So it's interesting because I think that some standardization would help in just making voting more accessible.
Well put and well said. And I would hope we could agree as a value that everyone should have access to the franchise as opposed to, because I even watch the TV and I get, very frustrated because, certain, I think right-leaning pundits will say, well, of course everyone should vote legally, and the whole issue is that's the point is that, Republicans are challenging the rules all the way up to this very day, are continuing to challenge the rules of what constitutes a legally cast ballot. And having some national uniformity just on that point alone would take that argument off the table and eliminate all the need for all these lawsuits if we had extreme clarity and baseline nationwide, again, particularly for federal, if not just federal general elections, about when, how votes can be collected and what constitutes a vote and when, how is it too late to vote and under what conditions can people vote for mail, absentee, etc. I did hear one, expert say that they think blockchain in the next 10 to 20 or 30 years will come and everybody can vote electronically from their phone and that'll be the day. But I feel like there's a way to do that now if we wanted to, but again, we don't even have online voter registration in certain places. So, everyone does not have a state issued ID. And so, I mean, under the law, under the Constitution, if you give your name and your address, that's all you. If you provide your name and address, you can go vote. In Maryland, I don't show my ID to vote in Maryland. Never have. I give them my name and my address. They check I'm there, and I go vote, and that's it. And under the law, historically, in many places, if not most places, that's all that's required. So many people, everyone does not have, and there's some places where people are in poor and in urban and rural communities, do not necessarily have a driver's license or state issued ID. So do we gonna make that a requirement for vote in some places since they struck down the law in 2013, the voting rights law? That's what's been required. You have to go get state ID, and that's a barrier for people who have to drive, who may not have a car, who could be elderly or what have you, or economically challenged, have to go 20, 30, 40 miles somewhere, wait in line, take a day off of work and spend money to get a state issued ID. And that creates another barrier in the form of a poll tax to keep people from voting. I want to close with this and thinking about our millennial folks and Gen Z folks. I know, like you mentioned, the young man who's now in office, 32 years old in Houston, and there are people who've been on this show and others who were elected on election night who are in their 20s and 30s, and people in my network and the show's network more broadly. And we see that generation coming up. Of course, we had, I think, a 25-year-old, the first person born in the 90s, a Republican in North Carolina, was elected to Congress. What do you see in the next 4 years? Of course, people talk about the demographic shifts, and that's causing part of the tension. Again, thinking in Texas, but thinking nationally. I think Texas, to some extent, is a microcosm of what's happening in many other states, many other places throughout America. What do you see coming in the years ahead in terms of what issues may be really a motivating factor for the millennial Gen Z to really come out to the vote, continue to get engaged, and how that might shape the agenda in our country going forward?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think before we think about policies, right, there's something to be said about folks just reacting to seeing candidates that represent them. So whether or not that's a young candidate or a Muslim candidate or the first woman candidate in a seat, I think the more we run young candidates and the more we run progressive candidates and candidates of color, we will win. Along with Christian, for instance, in Houston, our county clerk is a 34-year-old Black man, our county judge is a 29-year-old Latina, and the incoming elections administrator is a 32-year-old Latina. So I think there's a these are all candidates who, when they challenge 60-plus-year-old white men, were, maybe questioned why they were challenging those candidates, or maybe there was some skepticism around their candidacy, but something to be said about the fact that they are running and winning. And to your point, running on overly progressive platforms. I know that on Tuesday, we had a couple of states that moved forward with decriminalization of marijuana. I think that's going to be big in some of the state ledge sessions coming up in 2021. Interested to see if that is a motivating factor for young people. But honestly, I think that young people are interested in a lot of the things that both parties are pushing. We just need to change how we are talking about them.
That's Delilah Agho-Otoghile, the founder of VoteSimple, a voter registration organization in Texas with a wonderful analysis on Texas and on the nation. post-election day. Delilah, thanks for being a guest today on Necessary Trouble Show. Look forward to having you back very soon.
Thanks, Russell.
Thanks for watching the Necessary Trouble Show. Please visit necessarytroubleshow.com to support the show and to learn more. Subscribe to our e-newsletter and podcast, and follow us on social media at Necessary Trouble Show.
Good job, Daddy. This is Paige. Thanks for watching.